Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It's Tuesday, March 1st. So on Instagram, are you guys following me? I hope you guys do, because I'm working on this other story that I have yet to bring to YouTube because it's unfolding in real time. There's so many things happening with it. It involves a group of dancers. I know it's totally different in regards to what you're used to with like the Duggars and polygamy and that kind of stuff. And I'm doing everything I can to help this group. And I want to bring a story to YouTube, but I want to make sure that all my I have everything complete for you. So to get up to speed, do me a huge favor and run on over to my Instagram and follow me there. And if you're a fan of dance and a fan of the dance world, I think you will resonate with this. There's a lot of dancers now following me that are sharing their comments in the stories. And I think it's just a different vibe, but it's a good thing for this channel. And I think it'll be a good thing for you guys to get invested in another story. So maybe we can help this group too. I want to be able to help more than one group. We love helping the IBLP, which is why we're going to be here today, but we also need to help this group as well. By now, we know that the Duggars use the media to become famous and recruit for their group, and we also know that this is a common tactic in this world, and we also know where Josh Duggar finds himself today. Now, Josh Duggar is in a situation right now where he has responded to the government's motion, and generally, I would read you what he filed, and I would go point by point by point, and I would say, this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to read all of the details. We're going to go through every bit of the arguments. But in fairness, I do recognize that so many of you at this point know that what's in these motions being filed by his attorneys is basically nothing. There's nothing in here that's substantial. It's a lot of just words, puffy posturing to the court, positioning to the court that Josh is not guilty. And that's really what this motion is. So it's their response to the motion that January 19th, he filed a motion for a new trial or for an acquittal, or for some counts to be dropped. So we've kind of talked to you about what the government said. The government basically said that Josh was convicted under a massive amount of evidence. We know this. And that amount of evidence was the reason why. And Josh's attorneys want to argue that Josh didn't know what he was looking at, or even if Josh did it, like, we don't know. He didn't know what was on his computer. And they're like latching on to that one word of like, no, like, he didn't know, like knowingly possessed and knowingly viewed, you know what I mean? So that's sort of where they argue today. They spent quite a bit of time in their new motion basically saying that there's no proof that Josh watched the content, that there's no proof that he knew what was on these content. He wouldn't have known. And they said that the prosecutors in their response said that the titles alone Josh would have known. But then their argument for that was that if Josh would have even watched the content, they admit that the first 29 seconds that was viewed on the computer did not contain any of what he was eventually convicted of. So their arguments are, Josh didn't view anything. You can't prove that he viewed anything. Everything was found in the deleted folder. You've made so many mistakes here. Our expert didn't agree with your expert. Josh is the victim. Josh maintains his innocence. Josh took quite a bit of time to slam the prosecutors, their credibility, calling them names. I think a couple of things that I wanted to point out to you are that at the end of asking for an acquittal, this is what he says. Ultimately, Duggar maintains his innocence and does not seek to litigate this entire case in the context of Rule 29, which is basically what they were doing. Motion for judgment of acquittal. But this does not change the bottom line that the government failed to introduce any evidence that would allow a reasonable jury to conclude that he knew that visual depictions allegedly recovered from the wholesale motor car's desktop computer were of CSAM. He even says allegedly here because it's weird. This is proven now. Once you're convicted, these are factual statements. So it was not allegedly recovered. It was found on his computer. but they say that there wasn't reasonable evidence. But there was reasonable evidence, and that's why the jury convicted him. It's really stupid to even ask for this. They also say that the government mischaracterized Josh's argument and failed to provide the court with any grounds for concluding otherwise. So they need to give him a motion of acquittal. So that was sort of the crux of that. And then they spent a bunch of time arguing about Caleb Williams and how Caleb sent this email. Really just, they withheld it and all these nefarious actions. It's always, in Josh Duggar's world, it's always everyone else's fault. It's the government doesn't have credibility. The government is out to get him. They focused on him and they ignored everything with Caleb. And that's kind of what they argued today. But they did take time to yell at the prosecutors here, which I don't think is going to go over well with the judge. And they said that this is what it says. Contrary to the government's self-serving conclusion, Williams expressly acknowledges in 2 emails that he sent to the government that he had misled law enforcement about when he was at the Duggars car lot and that he had more passwords he was willing to provide if the government were interested in hearing about them. Literally says misled in that he literally provided proof in that email and said that he didn't mean to mislead. He didn't intentionally mislead. He had forgotten. That's way different than an intentional misleading. And then also acting as though he had passwords, which the government said he didn't have passwords. He didn't have passwords at all of Josh's. So, but they spent quite a bit of time yelling about the passwords and saying that he probably did know the password and they can't prove that he wasn't there. And how do they even know? Like, you remember how they said that he was going to have someone from Apple that would say that he was in the office at that day and or at the store that day, and his mom was going to testify. They even argued that, his mom and Apple, how do they know that they were even going to testify that? How do they know? Probably because they had that testimony and they knew, but it's just another way for them to posture to the court. And I think a lot of this is just a way for Josh to get his side out publicly without saying anything, because in court records, it's really kind of what Josh thinks. So they still want to blame this on Williams. They still want to say that Williams was there. They want to act like there's no evidence that Williams was at Apple and that his mom wasn't going to testify. And they want to act like this still was remote accessed. And then they also want to claim that Josh Duggar was prevented from calling Caleb, which, again, is not true. After they talk quite a bit about Caleb, then they talk about James Futrell, who brought in all of the evidence that basically pointed Josh to being at the car lot. They don't want this testimony to be allowed because it places Josh at the scene of the crime. And they admit as much. And they claim that James Futrell didn't disclose what he was going to be testifying to, and they're acting as though it would have been so easy for them to object. And in this case, the government's theory of prosecution was that because he was allegedly present at the car lot on certain specific dates and times, that Duggar was necessarily the person who perpetrated the offenses charged in the indictment. He was allegedly there. He was there. Duggar was, it says, Futrell's testimony and the associated exhibits cut directly to the core of that issue, allegedly placing Duggar at the lot at those times. But this expert testimony in the government failed to establish that Futrell was qualified to render an opinion on these topics. So they're basically saying that Futrell's testimony is what placed him at the scene, and what he uncovered is what placed him at the scene, and they want to get him out of that on a technicality. They're not arguing that what he found was true. They're not arguing that it happened. They're not arguing that he wasn't there. They're arguing that he wasn't qualified and he didn't disclose that he was going to say this, but they did. So again, they're lying. Now, this is the part where I'm sure you're here because the title is all about the sentencing and the bombshell. Well, that bombshell is that the reason why Josh wants the judge to throw out one of the charges is because the pre-sentencing report did not go in Josh's favor. It sounds like, based on what happened with pre-sentencing investigations and the report that was released and placed in the government, or provided to the government by his probation officer, includes time associated with both the charges. And it's a significant amount of time, and it's time that he doesn't want to do. And so they want to make sure that specific charge is dismissed before sentencing, so they can't include that when he's sentenced. we're looking at the probability that the probation officer has recommended he be sentenced under both, meaning that he could face up to 40 years, meaning that they could be asking for concurrent sentences or consecutive sentences here. It sounds like the sentencing report is not in Josh's favor, and they want to get rid of that charge because they don't want Josh to be sentenced on it. So this is what they say. The pre-sentence investigation and an advisory sentencing guideline computations and statutory range of possible punishment would all be impacted by the dismissal of count 2. So they're saying that there is additional time, considerable amount of it, that they don't want as a part of this, of his sentencing, and they want it out. They claim that if this count were to, they say, thus, to the extent this count were to conclude that this case is proceeding to sentencing, that double jeopardy clause prohibits Duggar from being sentenced on both counts. As such, Duggar asked the court to dismiss count 2 if and only if the post-trial motions are denied in advance of sentencing, so that the record is clean with respect to the post-trial sentencing report, the statutory range of his punishment, and sentencing guidelines computations by that time the parties show up at sentencing is clear. I don't know what the actual law says about this. I know they keep bringing up double jeopardy, meaning that you can't be punished for the same crime twice and charged with the same crime twice. I don't know if in this case that would be the same with sentencing, being that he did possess it and it was something that happened at the same time as the other crime. It was a charge that was included, like a crime that was included. So you can be charged with other offenses that happen while you're in a crime. So if you commit one crime and then another crime occurs, just because it happened under the same crime, you can still be charged. So I'm not clear about the double jeopardy part. He did receive it and he did possess it. So theoretically, I think he could be sentenced under both. And the prosecutors flat out said that when at the end of the hearing. They said that he could be sentenced under both. William Clayman stated that under the law, if the judge wants to sentence him under both, he can. And they know that. They know that William Clayman has made that statement. They know that William Clayman has said publicly, if the judge wants to sentence him under the both, he can. They want that out so that he can't. And they're going to say that it's illegal for him to be sentenced under that. And I don't know if that's true or not. I have no idea. I don't know what the judge is going to decide under that, but what this tells me is that Josh Duggar's post-trial sentencing it has a substantial sentence. I'm guessing decades. 25 plus years is probably what he's looking at right now. And if you add the other one, he might have been recommended the max. And that's probably what they're trying to get out of at this point. So they're going to throw all this other stuff at the wall. And then the final thing is, well, by the way, sentence us on this charge. And so therefore, you have to dismiss it. I don't know. It's stayed, meaning that he stayed it, like it's laying down. He can still, I think, technically sentence him under it. And I don't believe that's double jeopardy. But it'll be up to the judge and how the judge decides on that. So we'll have to wait and see. But this, again, tells me that they have a huge sentence that they're facing and they're trying to get as much time off as possible. And I hope that gives some of you guys a little bit of pause that his attorneys are working so hard to reduce this sentence because they know that he's facing a ton of time. William Clayman said he could face 40 years and he wasn't like flinching. All right, so I don't think he'll serve 40 years, but that was sort of like the discussion. So anyways, what are your thoughts about this? Do you think that the judge will go in the favor and dismiss that charge? I don't think the other stuff I'm not worried about because it's not going to happen. The judge is not going to give him a new trial and he's not going to give him an acquittal. But do you think the judge might potentially dismiss that charge? And what do you think, how many years do you think they recommended to him? Do you think it was the full 40 and that's why they're freaking out? Tell me in the comments below. Bye guys.